question that shattered 6 months of silence wasn't about quarterly reports or performance reviews. It was 5 words that cut straight through every carefully constructed wall. Why are you avoiding me? In that underground parking garage, beneath fluorescent lights that hummed like dying stars, Daniel Reeves faced the one person he'd sworn never to be alone with again. Not because she'd wronged him, not because of office politics or professional boundaries, but because every time he looked at Victoria Hale's face, he saw her sister dying in his arms on a rain-soaked highway. And today, there was nowhere left to run. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The parking garage smelled like concrete dust and exhaust fumes, a cathedral of shadows where Daniel Reeves had perfected the art of invisibility. Level P3, Section B, Spot 2, 47. He'd memorized the coordinates like a soldier memorizing extraction points. 5:47 a.m. Early enough that the executive spaces 3 floors up would still be empty. Early enough that he could slip in, do his work, and slip out before Victoria Hale's black Mercedes claimed its reserved spot at 7:15 a.m. sharp. Except today, the Mercedes was already there. Daniel's footsteps echoed against the low ceiling as he approached his Honda Accord, laptop bag heavy on his shoulder, travel mug of coffee, going cold in his left hand. His daughter Maya's artwork, a crayon drawing of their apartment building with a rainbow arcing overhead, was tucked in the side pocket of his bag, destined for his cubicle wall. She'd made him promise to hang it up. She was 7 years old and still believed her father worked somewhere important, somewhere that mattered. He didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, that he'd chosen the most anonymous position in the entire company specifically because it kept him 3 departments and 2 floors away from the executive suite. The overhead lights flickered. One of them had been dying for weeks, creating a strobe effect that made the shadows jump and retreat like living things. Daniel had reported it to facilities, twice. Nobody cared about lights in a parking garage. His car was 15 feet away when he heard the footsteps, not the sharp click of heels that echoed through this space every weekday morning at 7:15. These were measured, deliberate, the sound of someone who had been waiting. The sound of someone who had all the time in the world. Victoria Hale stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. She was dressed in what Daniel had come to think of as her armor. Charcoal suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, white blouse that somehow stayed crisp in the humidity, dark hair pulled back in a way that made her features sharp and unavoidable. At 42, she carried the kind of presence that made boardrooms go quiet. Forbes had called her the Ice Queen of Tech Innovation. Business Insider had run a profile titled How Victoria Hale Built an Empire on Precision and Fear. Neither publication knew that she baked chocolate chip cookies every Sunday. Neither knew that she laughed at terrible puns. Neither knew that she had a sister who used to call her Vic and who could make her cry laugh with a single look across a dinner table. But Daniel knew all of that because her sister had told him in those final moments when the rain hammered the crumpled metal and the sirens wailed in the distance and his hands were slick with blood that wouldn't stop flowing. Mr. Reeves, Mr. Victoria said. Her voice was calm, professional. The same voice she used in quarterly earnings calls. We need to talk. Daniel's fingers tightened around his car keys until the metal bit into his palm. The coffee mug trembled slightly in his other hand. I have an early meeting. Team stand-up. Can we schedule something through? You don't have an early meeting. She took 3 steps forward, and now she was close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the ones that appeared when she was tired or stressed or working 18-hour days because the alternative was going home to an empty penthouse. I checked your calendar. I've been checking your calendar for 6 months, Daniel. Every morning meeting, every late afternoon conflict, every lunch that runs long, very creative. The use of his first name sent ice down his spine. In the office, she called everyone by their last name. Mr. Chen, Miss Rodriguez, Dr. Patel. The formality was her shield, her way of maintaining distance in a company of 3,000 employees. But she just called him Daniel. I don't know what you... The North Stairwell. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it sharpened. You take the North Stairwell every single day, even though it adds 5 minutes to your commute, because you know I use the South elevators. You schedule your lunch breaks at 11:30 instead of noon. You volunteered to work from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the same days I hold in-person leadership meetings. You changed your gym from the company fitness center to Planet Fitness across town. Daniel's back hit his car. He hadn't realized he'd been retreating. You requested a transfer to the analytics department last March, Victoria continued, and now she was close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that reminded him of libraries and old paper. A lateral move, no pay increase, no title change. You're overqualified by about 5 years of experience. Your former manager tried to block it. Do you know why you got approved anyway? He didn't answer, couldn't answer. His throat had closed up. Because I approved it personally. She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way she probably studied balance sheets and market projections. I thought maybe you needed a change. Maybe the trauma response team wasn't the right fit. Maybe you needed space to heal, so I gave you space. The parking garage suddenly felt too small, the ceiling too low, the air too thick. 6 months, Daniel. Her voice softened, and somehow that was worse than if she'd been angry. 6 months of watching you rearrange your entire life to avoid being in the same room as me. 6 months of pretending not to notice when you see me in the hallway and immediately turn around. 6 months of wondering what I did wrong. You didn't... The words caught in his chest. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why? She spread her hands, and for just a moment the CEO disappeared, and there was just a woman standing in a parking garage at 6 in the morning, looking tired and confused and hurt. Why are you avoiding me? The question hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Daniel could feel his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. 6 months of 5 a.m. arrivals and strategic stairwell routes and declined invitations to company events. 6 months of perfecting the art of being present while remaining invisible. 6 months of running. And she just asked the one question he couldn't answer without destroying everything. I can't... He stopped. Started again. Ms. Hale, I really need to... Don't. The word was quiet but absolute. Don't do that. Don't hide behind titles and formality. I've watched you do it for half a year. I'm standing in front of your car at 6 in the morning because it's the only way I could think of to make you stay in one place long enough to have this conversation. So please, just tell me the truth. The truth. The truth was a highway slick with rain and shattered glass glittering in the headlights. The truth was a woman's hand going cold in his while he tried desperately to stop the bleeding. The truth was a promise he'd made to a dying stranger. Tell my sister I love her. Tell Vic I'm sorry I missed Sunday dinner. Tell her the password to my laptop is our mother's maiden name and our birthday. Tell her... The truth was that he'd failed. That he'd held pressure on wounds that wouldn't close and breathed air into lungs that wouldn't fill and whispered reassurances that turned out to be lies because the ambulance didn't make it in time. Because sometimes the distance was too far and the damage too severe and the rain too heavy for helicopter evacuation. The truth was that 3 days after the accident, he'd stood in the lobby of this very building with a list of final messages in his pocket, and he'd seen Victoria Hale for the first time. She'd been walking past security, phone pressed to her ear, giving someone instructions about a product launch. She'd been alive and focused, and completely unaware that her entire world had just shattered. And he'd looked at her face. The same sharp cheekbones, the same dark eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was concentrating. And he'd seen her sister, Emma Hale, who'd laughed at his jokes while the pain medication wore off, who'd made him promise to tell Vic that the secret ingredient in her cookies was espresso powder, who died at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday while he held her hand and lied about how everything was going to be okay. He turned around and walked out of the building, threw away the list, never delivered a single message. 2 months later, he had applied for a job in Victoria's company because he needed the health insurance and the salary and the stability for Maya. He thought he could handle it, thought he could keep his distance, thought, Daniel. Victoria's voice pulled him back to the present. She'd moved closer, close enough now that he could see the concern in her eyes, the way her professional mask was slipping. You're pale. Are you? Because seeing you hurts. The words fell out of him before he could stop them. Raw, unguarded. The truth he'd been running from for 6 months, maybe longer. Victoria froze. I'm sorry, Daniel said quickly, but the dam had broken and the words kept coming. I know that's not professional. I know that's not appropriate. I know I should have. I tried to. I thought if I just stayed away, if I just kept my head down and did my work and never. Why does seeing me hurt? He couldn't look at her, couldn't stand to see those eyes that were the wrong shade of brown, the face that was the right shape but the wrong person. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. I can't. Why not? Because it's not about work. The words came out louder than he intended, echoing off the concrete. Because this isn't about quarterly reports or team dynamics or professional boundaries. Because every time I look at you, I see... He stopped himself, closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them again, Victoria hadn't moved. She was watching him with an intensity that made him feel transparent, like she could see every scar and secret he'd ever tried to hide. You see what? She asked quietly. The overhead light flickered again. Somewhere above them, an elevator dinged. Early arrivals. The building was waking up. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. Maya's babysitter, probably, confirming drop-off time. Maya, who would ask him tonight if he'd hung up her rainbow drawing. Maya, who deserved a father who didn't spend his whole life running from ghosts. He looked at Victoria Hale, this woman he'd been avoiding, the CEO, who'd rearranged schedules and approved transfers and checked calendars for 6 months trying to understand why one of her employees treated her like a stranger at best and a threat at worst. I knew your sister, he said. The words dropped between them like stones into deep water. Victoria's expression didn't change, didn't move. For 3 seconds, she was absolutely still. Then, what? Emma. His voice cracked on the name. I knew Emma. That's... Victoria shook her head slowly. That's impossible. Emma died 3 years ago. You didn't start working here until 2 years and 7 months ago. I know. I didn't know you then. Didn't know she had a sister who was CEO of a tech company. Didn't know... He swallowed hard. Didn't know I'd end up working for you. Victoria's hand came up to her throat, fingers pressing against the hollow there like she was checking her own pulse. How did you know my sister? I was a paramedic, Daniel said. Before this. Before analytics and spreadsheets and corporate life. I was a paramedic for 11 years. He watched understanding begin to dawn in her eyes, horror and comprehension mixing together. No, she whispered. Highway 501, Daniel continued, and he couldn't stop now, couldn't keep running from this. 3 years ago, March 14th, 9:47 p.m. Drunk driver crossed the median. Your sister's car. Stop. Victoria held up a hand. Just stop. But he couldn't stop. He'd been carrying this for too long. I was first on scene, he said. Off duty. I was driving home from Maya's recital. I saw the crash happen. I pulled over. His voice broke. I stayed with her. Until the ambulance came. Until... Victoria's professional mask shattered completely. Her hand was still at her throat, and now her eyes were bright with tears that she was fighting desperately not to let fall. You were the paramedic? The one who... The police report said someone stayed with her. Someone held her hand. I tried to save her. The words came out broken. I did everything I could, but the damage, the internal bleeding... She wasn't alone. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. The police told me she wasn't alone when she couldn't finish the sentence. No, Daniel said. She wasn't alone. The parking garage was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of traffic from the street above. Early morning commuters starting their day, completely unaware that 2 people were standing in the shadows, sharing the weight of a tragedy 3 years old and still bleeding. She talked about you, Daniel said quietly. At the end, she was worried about you, about Sunday dinner, about her cookies. She made me promise... What? Victoria took a step forward. Promise what? This was where he'd failed. This was the moment he'd been avoiding for 6 months, for 3 years, maybe his whole life. To tell you she loved you, to give you messages, to... He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, opened his notes app, scrolled back through 3 years of grocery lists and meeting reminders and bedtime stories for Maya. There. The list he'd typed in the hospital parking lot at 1 a.m., when his hands had finally stopped shaking enough to hold a phone. Emma's last words, preserved in 12-point font. He held out the phone. Victoria stared at it like it might burn her. "You've had this for 3 years? I tried to give it to you. I came to this building, saw you in the lobby, and He couldn't explain it, couldn't put into words how seeing her face had felt like being pulled back into that crashed car, that rain, that moment of absolute helplessness. "I ran. I'm sorry, I ran." She took the phone from him. Her hands were trembling as she read. Daniel watched her face as she went through Emma's final messages. Watched her expression crack and reform and crack again. The note about the cookies, the apology for missing dinner, the password to her laptop. The love. So much love, condensed into words typed by a man she'd never met, delivered 3 years too late. When Victoria finally looked up, tears were streaming down her face. She made no attempt to hide them. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "When you interviewed for this job, when you started working here, when we passed each other in the hallway for the first time, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I failed her." The confession tore out of him. "I was a paramedic. It was my job to save people. And I couldn't save her. I held her hand and I lied to her and I told her everything would be okay, and then she died. She died believing she was going to make it, and that's on me." "That's on the drunk driver who crossed the median," Victoria said sharply. "That's on the man who got behind the wheel when he shouldn't have, not on you. I couldn't stop the bleeding. You stayed with her. The police report said—" Her voice broke. "It said she wasn't alone, that someone held her hand. Do you know what that meant to me? When I was identifying the body, when I was planning the funeral, when I was cleaning out her apartment and finding half-finished projects and unanswered emails, do you know what it meant to know that she wasn't alone?" Daniel couldn't answer. His throat had closed completely. "I've spent 3 years wondering who that person was," Victoria continued. "The police said they couldn't track down the first responder. Said it was probably someone off duty who didn't want to get involved with the investigation. And I understood. I did. But I wanted to thank them. I wanted to tell them that it mattered, that they mattered." She held out his phone. He took it, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "You've been avoiding me for 6 months because you think you failed my sister," Victoria said. "But from where I'm standing, you're the reason she wasn't alone when she died. You're the reason her last moments had kindness in them. And you've been punishing yourself for 3 years because you couldn't perform a miracle. I should have done more. You did everything." Her voice was firm now, the CEO voice, the voice that made boardrooms listen. "You stopped your car in the rain. You climbed into a wreck that probably wasn't safe. You stayed with a stranger when you could have just called 911 and driven away. You held her hand. You listened to her final words. You've carried them for 3 years." The elevator dinged again. More early arrivals. The building was filling up. "We can't do this here," Victoria said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. It was the most unprofessional gesture he'd ever seen her make, and somehow it made her more real. "My office, 30 minutes. I'll have my assistant clear my morning." I don't care what you have." She met his eyes, and there was steel beneath the tears. 30 minutes, Daniel. We're finishing this conversation. No more running." She turned and walked toward the elevator. Her footsteps echoed in the concrete cathedral, sharp and clear and absolutely certain. Daniel stood by his car, phone in hand, Emma's messages still glowing on the screen. The parking garage lights flickered overhead. His coffee had gone completely cold. Somewhere above, Maya was probably eating breakfast with the babysitter. Chocolate chip pancakes, if he'd remembered to buy the chocolate chips. She'd ask about the rainbow drawing tonight, ask if anyone at his office liked it. He looked down at his phone, at the list he'd carried for 3 years like a stone in his pocket. "Tell my sister I love her." He'd just done that. 3 years late. In a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and regret. But he'd finally done it. Daniel closed the Notes app, pocketed his phone, looked toward the elevator where Victoria had disappeared. 29 minutes. He'd spent 6 months running. Maybe it was time to stop. The overhead light flickered one more time, then steadied. The shadows retreated to their corners. And Daniel Reeves, former paramedic and current senior analyst and single father to a 7-year-old who believed in rainbows, walked toward the elevator. No more running. Not today. Victoria's office occupied the northwest corner of the 42nd floor, a space designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, glass and steel towers stretching toward a sky that was just beginning to lighten with dawn. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, chosen by someone who understood that power didn't need to announce itself. A single photograph sat on the credenza behind her desk. 2 women at a beach, arms around each other, laughing at something beyond the frame. Daniel had never been in this office before. He'd made sure of that. Victoria stood by the windows, her back to him, silhouette sharp against the growing light. She'd removed her suit jacket, draped it over her chair with uncharacteristic carelessness. Her reflection in the glass was ghostly, translucent, like she was only half present in the room. "Close the door," she said without turning around. Daniel did. The click of the latch sounded final, like something being sealed shut, or maybe opened. He couldn't tell anymore. "I had my assistant cancel everything until noon," Victoria continued. Her voice was steady now, the tears from the parking garage locked away behind professional composure. Almost. "Coffee?" "I'm fine." "I wasn't asking if you wanted any. I was telling you I need some." She moved to a corner of the office where a high-end espresso machine sat on a marble counter, gleaming and complex. "Emma gave me this 3 Christmases ago. She said I was too dependent on the break room coffee and it was affecting my decision-making." Her hands moved through the familiar motions of grinding beans, tamping grounds, positioning a cup. The machine hissed and gurgled, filling the silence. "She was right," Victoria added quietly. "She was right about most things." Daniel stood awkwardly near the door, still holding his laptop bag like a shield. The office felt too large and too small at the same time. Through the windows, the city was waking up. Lights in distant buildings flickering on. Lives beginning. People starting days that wouldn't include conversations like this one. Victoria finished making her coffee and turned to face him. "Sit. Please, you're making me nervous standing there like you're about to run again." "I wasn't going to run. Forgive me if I don't entirely believe that." But her tone was gentle, not accusatory. She moved to the sitting area, a leather couch and 2 chairs arranged around a low table, and settled into one of the chairs. 6 months has established a pattern. Daniel lowered himself onto the couch, setting his bag beside him. The leather was soft, expensive, the kind that probably cost more than his car. He felt out of place, like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. Victoria sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim of her cup. The police report was sparse on details about the first responder. It said someone stopped at the scene, someone administered first aid, someone stayed with her until the ambulance arrived at 10:23 p.m. She paused. "That's 36 minutes. You stayed with my sister for 36 minutes. I didn't time it." "The police did." She set down her cup with deliberate care. 36 minutes in the rain with a crash scene that the report described as structurally unstable and unsafe for civilian entry. The fire department arrived at 10:15 and tried to get you to move back. You refused. Daniel's hands tightened on his knees. He didn't remember the firefighters arriving. Didn't remember much except Emma's face, pale in the headlights, and the sound of rain hammering metal. "I read that report probably 100 times," Victoria said, looking for details. Trying to understand what her last moments were like, trying to find some kind of, I don't know, comfort, maybe? The knowledge that she wasn't in pain, that she wasn't afraid, that she wasn't alone. She looked at him directly. "You can give me those answers now, the ones the report couldn't." "Ms. Hale." "Victoria." The correction was quiet but firm. "I think we're past formality now, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "Victoria, I don't know if I should, if you really want to. I've wanted to know for 3 years." She leaned forward slightly. "I've imagined it 1,000 different ways, some of them kind, most of them not. So please, tell me the truth. All of it." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, he wasn't in Victoria's office anymore. He was back on Highway 501, rain coming down in sheets, his daughter's recital program getting soaked on the passenger seat of his truck. I saw the crash happen, he began. I was maybe 200 yards behind when the other car crossed the median. It was... fast isn't the right word. Fast doesn't capture it. 1 second the road was normal, headlights and taillights and rain. The next second there was metal screaming and glass exploding and something spinning off the road into the embankment. Victoria's hands were clasped tight in her lap, knuckles white. I pulled over, called 911, grabbed my jump bag from the back. Daniel had kept his emergency kit even after leaving the service. Old habits, muscle memory, the part of him that couldn't quite let go of who he'd been. The drunk driver's car had already caught fire. I could see him trying to crawl out, but Emma's car... He stopped, breathed. Her car was on its side, he continued. Driver's door crumpled. I had to climb in through the passenger side. The whole thing was unstable, shifting. I could hear metal groaning, but I could also hear her. She was conscious, calling for help. What did she say? Victoria's voice was barely audible. She said, I can't move my legs. The memory was sharp, cutting. She was pinned. Steering column had her trapped from the waist down. There was blood. A lot of blood. I could tell from the mechanism of injury, from the way she was positioned, I knew the chances weren't good. But you stayed. I stayed. Daniel met her eyes. I got the bleeding under control as best I could. Started an IV, kept her talking. That's what you do in situations like that. You keep them talking, keep them conscious, keep them fighting. Victoria's hand went to her throat again, that unconscious gesture he'd noticed in the parking garage. What did you talk about? Everything, nothing, whatever she wanted. Daniel could still hear Emma's voice, thready with pain but determined to stay present. She told me about her job, marketing director for some startup. She was excited about a campaign she'd just pitched, something about sustainable packaging. She made it sound fascinating, even though I didn't understand half the terminology. A ghost of a smile crossed Victoria's face. That was Emma. She could make anything interesting. She once spent 20 minutes explaining supply chain logistics to me at a dinner party, and I was genuinely riveted. She talked about Sunday dinners, Daniel continued. She said she'd missed the last two, and her sister was probably mad at her. She said you made this rule about family dinners being sacred, no matter how busy either of you got. I did make that rule. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. After our mother died, Emma and I were all each other had left. Sunday dinners were our tradition. She felt guilty about breaking it. She kept saying she'd make it up to you. She'd already picked out a recipe she wanted to try. Some kind of roasted chicken with herbs she couldn't pronounce. Daniel's throat tightened. She made me laugh. I was trying to keep her stable, trying to monitor her vitals, and she made a joke about how the universe had terrible timing. She'd just bought non-refundable plane tickets to Barcelona. The photography trip. Victoria closed her eyes. She'd been planning it for months. She was going to take a sabbatical. 3 weeks in Spain, just her and her camera. She showed me the itinerary. She was so excited. They sat in silence for a moment. Through the windows, the sun was breaching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene in their beauty. The world kept turning. The light kept coming. Life kept happening whether you were ready for it or not. When did you know? Victoria asked. When did you know she wasn't going to make it? Daniel had been dreading this question. About 15 minutes in. Her blood pressure started dropping. I couldn't maintain it no matter what I did. Internal bleeding, probably from a liver laceration or splenic injury. Maybe both. The paramedics were still 10 minutes out. Medevac couldn't fly in the weather. So you knew. For 21 minutes, you knew she was dying. Yes. Did you tell her? No. The word came out firm. No. I told her help was coming. I told her she was doing great. I told her to keep fighting. I told her about my daughter, about the recital I'd just left. She asked about Maya, asked how old she was, what she was learning in school. I showed her a picture on my phone. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. You showed my dying sister a picture of your daughter? She asked to see one. She said... Daniel paused, remembering. She said if she had to be stuck in a crashed car in the rain, at least she got to spend it with someone who clearly loved their kid enough to carry their picture as their phone wallpaper. She made me promise to give Maya a hug for her. Did you? Every night for a month. Daniel's voice roughened. I'd put Maya to bed and I'd hug her, and I'd think about your sister asking me to do it, about this stranger who was dying and who still wanted to send love out into the world. Victoria stood abruptly and walked back to the windows. Her shoulders were rigid, her spine straight, every inch the CEO. But her reflection in the glass betrayed her. Daniel could see tears tracking down her face. I'm sorry, he said. I know this is... Don't apologize. She didn't turn around. I asked for this. I need to hear it. She wiped at her face roughly. What happened at the end? The ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics I knew. Good people. They assessed the situation and we all knew. We all knew we were out of time. We had to make a choice, try to extract her from the vehicle, which would take at least 20 minutes, and she didn't have 20 minutes. Or stay with her. Make her comfortable. You chose to stay. We all chose to stay. Daniel stood, moved toward the windows, but kept a respectful distance. One of the paramedics gave her morphine, enough to take the edge off the pain, not so much that she'd lose consciousness. She wanted to stay awake. She was very clear about that. That sounds like Emma. Victoria's laugh was watery, broken. She was stubborn, even at the end. She was brave, Daniel corrected gently. She knew what was happening. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't stupid and she wasn't in denial, but she didn't panic. She didn't rage. He searched for the right words. She just wanted to make sure the people she loved knew she loved them. Victoria turned to face him finally. Her professional mask was completely gone now, stripped away. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable, more human. That's when she gave you the messages, Victoria said. Yes. Daniel pulled out his phone again, called up the notes. She was very specific. She made me repeat everything back to her to make sure I got it right. She said you'd need the laptop password because all her work files were on there and her team would need access. She said the cookies recipe was in a blue notebook in her kitchen, second drawer on the left. She said to tell you that the secret ingredient was espresso powder and she'd been keeping it from you for 5 years as a joke. Victoria's hand came up to cover her mouth. I asked her so many times. She always said a chef never reveals her secrets. She also said to tell you that she wasn't mad about the fight you had. Daniel scrolled through the notes. She said you were right about the guy she'd been dating. She said she should have listened. She said she was sorry she wasted 6 months on someone who didn't deserve 6 minutes. Jeremy. Victoria practically spat the name. He was using her to get investor contacts. I saw through him immediately. We had a horrible fight about it at Sunday dinner. She stormed out. That was the last time She stopped, pressed her fingers to her eyes. The last time I saw her alive. We fought about her terrible boyfriend and then she died thinking I was mad at her. She didn't die thinking that, Daniel said firmly, because I told her you weren't mad. I told her that sisters fight and make up, and that's what sisters do. And she smiled. She actually smiled. And she said, Vic will say I told you so. She'll be very smug about it. Please tell her she has full permission to be smug. A sob broke from Victoria's throat, raw and painful. She turned back to the window, shoulders shaking. Daniel stood helpless, watching this powerful woman come apart in her corner office while the sun rose over the city. He'd spent 6 months avoiding her, spent 3 years carrying her sister's last words like a penance, and now here they were. 2 people who'd never met, bound together by 36 minutes in the rain. There's more, he said quietly. If you want to hear it. Victoria nodded without turning around. She talked about your mother, about how she hoped she'd get to see her again, wherever people go after. She said your mother made the best apple pie in the world, and she'd been trying for 10 years to recreate it and never quite got it right. Daniel checked his notes. She said to look in her freezer. She'd frozen a slice from the last pie she made just in case. She wanted you to taste it, see if she'd finally figured out the secret. Did she? Victoria's voice was muffled. I don't know. I'm just the messenger. Did you? Victoria turned around. Her face was blotchy, mascara smudged, every trace of the Ice Queen gone. Did you check? After she died, did you go to her apartment? Did you look for the pie? No. Daniel's stomach twisted with guilt. I couldn't. I showed up at this building once to deliver the messages, and I saw you, and I ran. I threw away my chance. I'm sorry. You threw away the list? Not the list, the courage. He gestured helplessly. I failed your sister. I couldn't save her. And then I failed her again by not delivering her last words. I've been failing her for 3 years. Stop saying that. Victoria's voice was sharp now, cutting through his self-recrimination. Stop saying you failed her. You gave her comfort in her last moments. You held her hand. You listened to her. You carried her words for 3 years. That's not failure. I should have saved her. You're not a miracle worker. You're a paramedic. She paused. Were a paramedic. Why did you leave the service? The question caught him off guard. It's complicated. So was my sister's death. I seem to be handling complicated today. She moved to the couch, sat down, looked at him expectantly. Why did you leave? Daniel remained by the windows, unable to sit, unable to stay still with the memories crowding in. After Emma, he began. After that night, I tried to keep working, told myself I was fine. I told myself it was just another call, just another loss. We lose patience. It happens. It's part of the job. He shook his head. But I couldn't shake it. Every call with a car accident, I'd freeze up. Every patient with internal bleeding, I'd see her face. Every time I couldn't save someone, I'd think about Emma asking me to tell her sister she loved her. PTSD, Victoria said softly. Probably. I never got formally diagnosed, never went to therapy. I kept showing up, kept doing the job. But I was making mistakes, small ones at first, forgetting to document things, missing details in patient assessments, then bigger ones. His hands clenched. I almost gave the wrong medication dose to a cardiac patient. My partner caught it before I administered, but it was close, too close. So you quit? I took a leave of absence, got my affairs in order, realized I had a daughter who needed a father who was present, not someone going through the motions while fighting ghosts. Daniel finally moved away from the window, paced the length of the office. I'd been taking online courses in data analytics, something my wife had suggested before I lost her too. Victoria's expression shifted. Maya's mother? Cancer. 5 years ago. Ovarian. Stage 4 by the time they found it. The words came easier now, worn smooth by repetition. I was working as a paramedic, trying to save strangers while my wife was dying at home. Maya was too young to understand why mommy was always tired, always sick. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's life, right? Bad things happen. People die. You keep going because what else can you do? You have a kid who needs breakfast and help with homework and someone to tell her that yes, rainbows are magic, and yes, her drawings are definitely good enough for the office wall. The drawing in your bag, Victoria said. She asked you to hang it up. She makes me promise every time. I think she's worried I'll forget, that I'll get too busy with my important job and her art won't matter anymore. Daniel's voice softened. So I hang them all up. My cubicle looks like a kindergarten classroom. My coworkers probably think I'm weird. I think they probably think you're a good father. The compliment landed unexpectedly, warm and uncomfortable at the same time. I try to be, Daniel said. It's all I've got left to get right. I failed as a husband. I couldn't save my wife. I failed as a paramedic. I couldn't save your sister. The only thing I haven't failed at yet is being Maya's dad. And some days even that feels like I'm barely holding it together. That's not failure, Victoria said. That's being human. Is it? Daniel stopped pacing, faced her. Because from where I'm standing, being human looks a lot like letting people down, like making promises I can't keep, like running away when things get hard. You didn't run away from Emma. I ran away from you, because you were traumatized and grieving and trying to survive. Victoria stood, closed the distance between them. Daniel, look at me. Really look at me. What do you see? He looked, saw dark eyes that weren't Emma's, saw a face that was similar but distinct, saw a woman who'd built an empire while carrying her own grief, who baked cookies on Sundays because her sister had taught her how, who'd spent 6 months trying to understand why one of her employees avoided her like she carried a contagious disease. I see someone who lost the same person I lost, he said finally, just in a different way. Exactly. Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. We're both carrying Emma. We're both living in the shadow of that night, and we've both been pretending we're fine when we're not. You seem fine. You run a company. You're on the cover of magazines. Forbes called you the Ice Queen. I know, I've read the articles. She smiled bitterly. Do you know why I work 18-hour days? Why I never take vacations? Why my assistant has to force me to eat lunch? Because you're dedicated? Because if I stop moving, I have to feel things. The confession came out raw. If I sit still, I have to remember that my sister is dead, that the last real conversation we had was a fight, that I never got to tell her she was right about the pie. She finally figured out Mom's recipe. I found the slice in her freezer when I was cleaning out her apartment. I sat on her kitchen floor and ate it and cried until I threw up. Daniel's chest tightened. Victoria, you asked me what I see when I look at you, she continued. I see the last person who talked to my sister, the last person who heard her voice, the last person who held her hand. And yes, sometimes that hurts. Sometimes it hurts so much I can't breathe. But you know what else I see? What? I see someone who stopped their car in the rain when they could have driven past. I see someone who climbed into a dangerous wreck to comfort a stranger. I see someone who carried my sister's last words for 3 years because delivering them was too painful. I see someone who's trying so hard to be good enough that they've forgotten they're already good. The words hit him like a physical force. He had to look away, had to breathe, had to process the fact that she wasn't angry, wasn't blaming him, wasn't, I don't deserve that, he managed. That's not your call to make, Victoria said. You don't get to decide what you deserve. You don't get to punish yourself forever because you couldn't perform a miracle on a highway in the rain. But I should have. Stop. She held up a hand. Just stop. We can play the should-have game forever. I should have made Emma dump Jeremy sooner. I should have insisted she come to Sunday dinner. I should have called her that night instead of texting. I should have told her I loved her more often, more clearly, more specifically. Her voice broke. But I didn't. And she's still gone. And no amount of should-haves will change that. They stood facing each other in the growing morning light. The city stretched out behind them, indifferent to their pain. The coffee had gone cold. The day had started without their permission. And somewhere, Maya was probably finishing her chocolate chip pancakes, maybe wondering if her dad remembered to bring her drawing to work. I don't know how to stop punishing myself, Daniel admitted. I don't know how to look at you without seeing her. I don't know how to be in the same room as you without feeling like I failed. Then maybe we figure it out together, Victoria said. Maybe we stop avoiding each other and start, I don't know, start acknowledging that we're both still here, still breathing, still trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense. That sounds harder than avoiding you. Probably. A small smile touched her lips. But I'm tired of the alternative. I'm tired of wondering. I'm tired of working myself to death to avoid feeling alive. And I think, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I think maybe Emma would want better for both of us. The words hung between them like a question neither of them knew how to answer. Daniel was about to respond when Victoria's phone buzzed insistently on her desk. She glanced at it, frowned, then looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That's my assistant, she said. Third time in 2 minutes. Something's wrong. She crossed to her desk and picked up the phone, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Daniel watched the transformation, saw her shoulders straighten, and her voice cool as she answered. Yes, Patricia? A pause. Then her entire body went rigid. What? When? Are they still in the building? Daniel felt his stomach drop. Something in her tone, and the way her free hand gripped the edge of her desk, told him this wasn't a normal business crisis. Send them to conference room C, Victoria said, her voice tight and controlled. Don't let them leave. I'll be there in 5 minutes. She ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, staring at the phone like it had just delivered a death sentence. What's wrong? Daniel asked. Victoria looked up at him, and he saw something he'd never seen in her before. Not grief, not vulnerability. Raw, burning rage. "Marcus Webb is here," she said. "He has his lawyer with him. They're requesting a meeting." The name meant nothing to Daniel. "Who's Marcus Webb?" "The drunk driver who killed my sister." Her voice was absolutely flat, emotion locked down so tight he could see the effort it took. "He's been in prison for the last 3 years. Vehicular manslaughter. He got 8 years. He's apparently up for early release, and his lawyer wants to discuss—" She stopped, her jaw working. "They want to discuss their legal strategy." Their legal strategy for what? For getting him out early. But Victoria set down her phone with deliberate care, like she was afraid if she moved too quickly, she might throw it through the window. For reducing his sentence further, for making sure his record doesn't follow him around for the rest of his privileged life. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. Why would they come here? Why would they come to you? Because they're going to try to shift the blame. Victoria's hands were shaking now, the only visible sign of the fury churning beneath her surface. They're going to argue that Emma's death wasn't entirely Marcus's fault, that there were contributing factors, that the first responder on scene— She stopped, looked at him. That the paramedic who treated her made critical errors that contributed to her death. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? It's a common legal strategy. Her voice was bitter, clinical. Find someone else to blame. Create reasonable doubt about the severity of your client's culpability. They've probably hired expert witnesses. Medical professionals who will review the case file and testify that with proper treatment, Emma might have survived. Daniel's legs felt unsteady. He sat down heavily on the couch. But that's not true. The injuries were catastrophic. No amount of treatment— I know that. Victoria's voice softened slightly. You know that, but a jury, a parole board, they hear medical experts talking about protocols and standard of care and missed opportunities, and suddenly there's doubt. And doubt is all they need. They can't— Daniel's mind was racing. I documented everything. I followed every protocol. I did everything by the book. I'm sure you did. She moved toward him, sat down on the chair across from him. But you were off duty. You didn't have a full ambulance worth of equipment. You were alone until the other paramedics arrived. They'll pick apart every decision you made and argue that a different choice might have changed the outcome. But I saved her life for 36 minutes, Daniel said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. I kept her alive until help arrived. I gave her comfort. I know. Victoria reached across the space between them, her hand covering his. The touch was warm, grounding. I know exactly what you did. And I know that without you, my sister would have died alone and afraid in that wreck. But Marcus Webb's lawyer doesn't care about that. He cares about getting his client out of prison. Daniel stared at their joined hands. 3 years ago, he'd held Emma's hand while she died. Now he was holding her sister's hand while learning that his worst fear, that he hadn't done enough, hadn't been good enough, was about to be weaponized by the man who'd killed her. I should have seen this coming, Victoria said quietly. When Patricia told me last week that the parole board was reviewing his case, I should have anticipated this move, but I was so focused on making sure he stayed in prison that I didn't think about how they'd try to get him out. What do we do? Daniel asked. Victoria's expression hardened. We go down there and we shut this down before it starts. Victoria, I'm not good at confrontation. I'm not good at— You don't have to be good at it. She squeezed his hand once, then released it and stood. You just have to tell the truth. Can you do that? He thought about Maya, about the promise he'd made to himself in the parking garage. No more running. He stood, his legs steadier than he expected. Yes, he said. I can do that. Victoria's smile was sharp and cold. Good, because I'm about to show Marcus Webb and his lawyer exactly why Forbes calls me the Ice Queen. Conference room C was on the 38th floor, a sterile space of glass walls and expensive furniture designed to make people feel small. When Daniel and Victoria walked in, 2 men were already seated at the long table. One was young, maybe 30, wearing a suit that screamed expensive lawyer. The other was older, mid-40s, with the kind of face that might have been handsome before alcohol and guilt had worn it down. Marcus Webb looked nothing like Daniel had imagined. He'd pictured a monster, someone whose appearance would match the horror of what he'd done. Instead, he saw a tired man in an orange jumpsuit, hands clasped on the table, head slightly bowed. He looked up when they entered, and Daniel saw something flicker across his face. Shame, maybe. Or fear. The lawyer stood immediately, extending his hand. Ms. Hale, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I'm Robert Chambers, representing Mr. Webb in his parole proceedings. Victoria ignored his hand. She walked to the head of the table and remained standing, forcing both men to look up at her. Daniel positioned himself slightly behind her, feeling out of place and off balance. You have 5 minutes, Victoria said. Her voice could have frozen water. Explain why you're here. Chambers lowered his hand, unfazed by the rudeness. As I explained to your assistant, Mr. Webb is up for early release pending review by the parole board. We're preparing our case and wanted to discuss. You want to blame someone else for my sister's death, Victoria cut him off. Let's not waste time with euphemisms. Chambers had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. We're exploring all angles of the case, including the quality of care your sister received at the scene of the accident. The quality of care? Victoria repeated the words like they tasted foul. My sister was pinned in a crushed vehicle with massive internal bleeding. The quality of care she received was the difference between dying alone in the dark and dying with someone holding her hand. How dare you suggest otherwise? Ms. Hale, I understand this is emotional for you. Don't! The single word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare tell me this is emotional. This is factual. My sister died because your client got behind the wheel drunk and crossed the median into oncoming traffic. The toxicology report showed his blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. He killed her, not the paramedic who tried to save her. Marcus Webb flinched at the words, his head dropping lower. Chambers put a hand on his client's arm, a gesture that might have been comfort or warning. The police report indicates the first responder on scene was off-duty and alone, Chambers pressed on. Our medical expert has reviewed the case file and believes that certain interventions, had they been performed correctly, might have what? Victoria's voice was deadly quiet now. Might have prevented catastrophic injuries that were sustained on impact. Might have stopped internal bleeding that required a trauma surgeon and an operating room. Your expert wasn't there. Your expert didn't see what that crash scene looked like. Your expert is being paid to create doubt where none exists. Ms. Hale, if we could just... This is Daniel Reeves. Victoria gestured toward him, and Daniel felt every eye in the room turn his direction. The off-duty paramedic your expert plans to blame. The man who risked his own safety to climb into an unstable wreck. The man who kept my sister alive and conscious and comfortable for 36 minutes while waiting for an ambulance. Would you like to tell him to his face that he didn't do enough? Chambers looked at Daniel with cool assessment, like he was evaluating a piece of evidence. Mr. Reeves, I'd very much like to discuss your recollection of that night, for our records. Daniel's mouth went dry. He could feel Victoria's presence beside him, solid and steady, but his voice still came out rough when he spoke. I followed every protocol. I did everything I could. I'm sure you did your best, Chambers said, his tone professionally sympathetic. But as you know, in emergency medicine, best efforts don't always translate to best outcomes. Our expert believes that certain decisions you made, the choice to stabilize rather than extract, for instance, may have contributed to... Stop. The word came out louder than Daniel intended. He took a breath, forced himself to continue. You want to know what contributed to Emma Hale's death? Your client's decision to drink and drive. That's it. That's the only contributing factor that matters. Mr. Reeves, I understand you're defensive, but I'm not defensive. Daniel felt something crystallizing inside him, something hard and clear. I'm telling you the truth. I made the choices I made because I'm trained to assess injuries and determine the best course of action. Emma had massive internal trauma. Moving her would have accelerated the bleeding and killed her faster. Keeping her stable gave her the best chance of surviving until advanced care arrived. It wasn't enough to save her life, but it gave her time. Time to be conscious. Time to send messages to her sister. Time to die with dignity instead of terror. Marcus Webb made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. His lawyer shot him a warning look. Mr. Reeves, Chambers tried again, our expert witness is a highly respected trauma surgeon with 20 years of experience. He's reviewed your documentation and believes he wasn't there. Daniel's voice was steady now, growing stronger. He wasn't in the rain. He wasn't listening to metal groan and shift. He wasn't watching a woman bleed out while knowing help was still minutes away. He's reviewing paperwork and making judgments about split-second decisions that I made while trying to keep someone alive. That's not expertise. That's Monday morning quarterbacking. Nevertheless, Chambers said coolly, his testimony will carry significant weight with the parole board. Unless, of course, we can reach an understanding that makes such testimony unnecessary. Victoria's laugh was cold and sharp. Are you actually attempting to blackmail us? You'll drop your fictitious negligence claims if we support your client's early release? I wouldn't characterize it as I would. Victoria leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. Let me make something absolutely clear, Mr. Chambers. You can parade 100 expert witnesses in front of the parole board. You can pick apart every decision Mr. Reeves made that night. You can create all the doubt you want. But what you cannot do is change the fundamental truth of this case. She straightened, her voice dropping to something quiet and lethal. Your client chose to drink. He chose to drive. He chose to get on that highway knowing he was impaired. And because of those choices, my sister is dead. Not because a paramedic made a judgment call, not because the ambulance took 36 minutes to arrive, because Marcus Webb decided his convenience was more important than public safety. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and wet. I know, he said, his voice cracking. I know I killed her. I think about it every day. I dream about it every night. He stopped, his lawyer's hand tightening on his arm in warning. Don't, Chambers hissed at his client, but Marcus shook off his lawyer's hand. No, I need to say this. He looked at Victoria, then at Daniel. I was drunk. I was stupid. I made a choice that killed someone, and I deserve to be in prison for it. I didn't ask Robert to do this. I didn't ask him to blame anyone else. Marcus, as your attorney, I'm advising you to stop talking, Chambers said sharply. I don't care. Marcus's voice was getting louder, more desperate. I don't care about early release. I don't care about getting out. I care about the truth. And the truth is that I killed Emma Hale. Not this man. Not the paramedics. Me. The room fell silent. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears. He watched Marcus Webb break down, watched this man who destroyed lives with a single choice finally acknowledge the weight of what he'd done. Chambers looked like he wanted to strangle his client. Mr. Webb, we discussed this strategy extensively. We agreed that creating reasonable doubt about the standard of care was our best avenue for... I don't want that avenue. Marcus was crying openly now. I don't want to get out early by destroying someone else's life. I already destroyed enough. You're not thinking clearly, Chambers tried again. The conditions in that facility are... I don't care about the conditions. Marcus looked at Victoria with something like desperation. Ms. Hale, I know nothing I say will bring your sister back. I know sorry doesn't mean anything, but I am sorry. I'm so sorry, and I can't let my lawyer blame the person who tried to save her. I can't do that. Victoria stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Daniel could see her processing, calculating, deciding. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Mr. Webb, she said, do you know what my sister's last words were? Marcus shook his head, looking like he was bracing for a blow. She told Mr. Reeves to tell me she loved me. She talked about cookies and Sunday dinners and inside jokes. She spent her last moments thinking about the people she cared about. Not about being angry, not about revenge, about love. Victoria's voice hardened. You want to honor her memory? You want to actually show remorse? Then you serve your full sentence. You accept responsibility, and you never ever try to blame someone else for what you did. I will, Marcus said immediately. I'll serve every day. I'll tell the parole board I don't want early release. Marcus, stop talking, Chambers snapped. He turned to Victoria, his professional composure fraying. Ms. Hale, my client is clearly emotionally compromised. Anything he's saying right now is the truth, Victoria cut him off, which is apparently something you're not interested in. This meeting is over, Mr. Chambers. You can show yourselves out, or I can call security. Your choice. Chambers stood, gathering his briefcase with jerky, angry movements. This is highly irregular. We came here in good faith to... You came here to threaten us, Daniel heard himself say. His voice was calm, almost detached. You came here to tell us you'd blame me for Emma's death unless we supported your client's early release. That's not good faith. That's extortion. We came here to discuss legal strategy, Chambers insisted. And now you're leaving, Victoria said. Marcus, you're welcome to stay if you want to talk, but your lawyer needs to go. Chambers looked at his client with barely concealed fury. Marcus, if you stay here without legal representation and say anything that jeopardizes your case... I don't care about my case, Marcus said quietly. I care about doing the right thing for once in my life. Chambers stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. You're making a terrible mistake. When you change your mind, and you will, don't call me. He walked out, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Marcus sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Victoria remained standing at the head of the table, her expression still unreadable. Daniel felt like he was watching something unfold from a great distance, something important that he didn't fully understand yet. Finally, Marcus looked up. His face was blotchy and wet. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that Robert was lying. I never asked him to blame the paramedic. When he told me that was his strategy, I said no. I told him I wouldn't cooperate with it. He said he'd do it anyway, said it was the best legal approach whether I liked it or not. Then why come here at all? Victoria asked. He told me you'd requested the meeting, that you wanted to hear our case before the parole hearing. I believed him. Marcus laughed bitterly. I'm an idiot. I believed my lawyer when he said this was about transparency, about giving you closure. Closure, Victoria repeated. The word seemed to pain her. There's no such thing as closure, Mr. Webb. My sister doesn't stop being dead. The hole she left doesn't stop aching. Time doesn't heal wounds. It just teaches you to carry them better. I know. Marcus's voice was barely audible. I carry what I did every day. I see her face every time I close my eyes. The police showed me pictures of the crash scene, of what my choices caused. I can't unsee it. I can't undo it. All I can do is... He stopped, struggling. All I can do is try to be honest about what happened. Try to make sure no one else gets blamed for my mistakes. Daniel found himself speaking before he'd decided to. Why did you do it? Why did you drive drunk? Marcus looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Because I was selfish. Because I'd been at a work happy hour and I was only 10 minutes from home and I thought I was fine. I thought I was in control. I thought... He stopped. I thought I was special. I thought the rules didn't apply to me. I thought I could handle it. And now? Daniel pressed. Now I know I was wrong about everything. Marcus's voice cracked. Now I know that 10 minutes of convenience cost a woman her life. Cost her sister a lifetime of grief. Cost a paramedic... He looked at Daniel. I don't even know your name. I don't know anything about you except that you tried to save someone I killed, and my lawyer wanted to destroy your reputation to get me out of prison early. Daniel Reeves, Daniel said, and I have a 7-year-old daughter who thinks I'm a hero because I hang her drawings on my cubicle wall. Before your lawyer's strategy, the worst thing she knew about me was that I sometimes forget to pack her favorite snacks. If your expert witness had testified, if this had gone to a hearing, she would have learned that her father was blamed for someone's death. She would have grown up wondering if her dad was really the person she thought he was. The weight of those words settled over the room. Marcus closed his eyes, fresh tears sliding down his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, Daniel said, and he was surprised by how calm he felt, how clear. But taking responsibility does, telling the truth does. Refusing to let your lawyer blame someone else, that matters. Victoria moved around the table, standing directly in front of Marcus. Look at me, she said. Marcus raised his head. I will never forgive you, Victoria said clearly. I will never stop hating what you did. I will never stop missing my sister. But I'll also never forget that when your lawyer gave you an easy way out, you chose to tell the truth instead. She paused. That doesn't make us friends. It doesn't make what you did acceptable. But it means you're not completely lost. It means there's some part of you that understands honor. Thank you, Marcus breathed. Don't thank me. I didn't do this for you. Victoria's voice was steel. I did this because my sister deserves better than having her death turned into a legal strategy. She deserves the truth. And the truth is that you killed her, and Daniel Reeves tried to save her, and no amount of expert testimony will change those facts. She turned to the door, then paused and looked back. The parole board will make their decision based on your behavior and your remorse, not on fictional negligence claims. If you genuinely feel the remorse you claim to feel, prove it by serving your sentence with dignity. Prove it by never trying to minimize what you did. Prove it by making sure that when you do eventually get out, you spend the rest of your life making choices that honor the life you took. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Victoria walked out. Daniel followed, his mind reeling. They'd come down here expecting a fight, expecting to defend against accusations and blame. Instead, they'd witnessed something unexpected. Not redemption. Marcus Webb didn't deserve that. But accountability. Truth. The kind of raw honesty that only came when someone finally stopped running from what they'd done. The elevator doors closed on them with a soft hiss. They stood in silence as the car climbed back toward the executive floors. Daniel could feel adrenaline draining from his system, leaving him shaky and exhausted. That was, he started. Unexpected, Victoria finished. She leaned against the elevator wall, suddenly looking as tired as he felt. I prepared myself for a fight. I prepared myself to defend you. I didn't prepare myself for him to have a conscience. Do you think he meant it? Daniel asked. The remorse? I don't know. Victoria closed her eyes. I want to believe people can change. I want to believe that 3 years in prison taught him something about consequences and responsibility. But I also know that people say whatever they need to say to feel better about themselves. He stopped his lawyer. He did. She opened her eyes, looked at Daniel. He could have stayed quiet, could have let Chambers run his strategy and blamed you and maybe gotten out early. But he didn't. That has to count for something. The elevator dinged. They were back on the 42nd floor, back in the world of corner offices and quarterly reports and normal problems that didn't involve drunk drivers and dead sisters and 3-year-old guilt. I need a minute, Victoria said as they stepped into the hallway. I need to process what just happened. Take all the time you need, Daniel said. I should check in with my team. I've been gone all morning. Daniel. She caught his arm as he turned to leave. Thank you. For coming down there with me. For standing up to Chambers. She stopped, struggled. For everything. For Emma. For today. For finally telling me the truth. I should have told you 3 years ago. Maybe. Her grip on his arm tightened slightly. But you told me today, and that matters. She released him and walked toward her office. Daniel stood in the hallway, watching her go, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet in ways he didn't fully understand yet. His phone buzzed, a text from Maya's babysitter with a photo attached. Maya at the kitchen table, tongue sticking out in concentration, working on another drawing. This one was a family portrait, stick figures labeled Daddy and Maya, with a rainbow overhead and the words Best Family written in crayon at the top. Daniel stared at the image, his daughter, who believed he was a hero, who trusted him to hang her drawings and pack her snacks and keep being the father she needed, who had no idea that this morning her dad had almost been blamed for someone's death, who would never know now because a drunk driver had chosen honesty over convenience. He texted back a heart emoji and a promise to be home on time. Then he headed toward his cubicle, toward the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and data analysis and work that didn't require him to relive the worst night of his life. But as he walked through the office, past coworkers who had no idea what had just happened in conference room C, Daniel realized something had shifted. The weight he'd been carrying for 3 years hadn't disappeared. It never would. But it felt different now. Less like a punishment and more like a responsibility. Less like failure and more like truth. He'd told Victoria about Emma. He'd stood up to a lawyer who wanted to blame him. He'd watched Marcus Webb choose accountability over freedom. And somehow, impossibly, he'd survived all of it. No more running, he'd promised himself in the parking garage. No more hiding from the truth. He'd kept that promise. And the world hadn't ended. In fact, for the first time in 3 years, Daniel Reeves felt like maybe, just maybe, he could breathe again. Daniel's cubicle was exactly as he'd left it that morning, neat, organized, impersonal, except for the wall covered in Maya's artwork. Rainbows and stick figures and crayon houses with smoke curling from chimneys. A gallery of innocence that stood in sharp contrast to the morning he'd just survived. He sat down at his desk and stared at his computer screen without really seeing it. His hands were still trembling slightly, residual adrenaline working its way through his system. He should pull up the quarterly reports he'd been analyzing, should check his email, should do something that resembled normal work for the company that paid his salary. Instead, he found himself looking at the empty space on his wall where Maya's newest drawing would go. The rainbow over their apartment building, the promise he'd made to hang it up. Such a small thing, such a simple request from a 7-year-old who just wanted to know her art mattered to her father. He pulled the drawing from his laptop bag, smoothed out the corners where it had gotten slightly crumpled. The colors were vibrant, cheerful, completely unaware of the weight their creator's father carried. Maya had drawn them both standing in front of their building, stick figure hands joined, both of them smiling. Above them, the rainbow arced in perfect crayon stripes, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. She'd gotten the order right. He'd taught her the mnemonic last month. Roy G. Biv. Daniel pinned the drawing to his wall, right at eye level where he'd see it every time he looked up from his work, where it would remind him why he'd left the ambulance service, why he'd chosen data analysis and corporate stability over the adrenaline and purpose of emergency medicine, why he got up at 5 in the morning and avoided his CEO and tried so hard to be invisible. Because Maya needed a father who came home, who didn't carry the weight of strangers' deaths into her bedtime stories, who could look at her rainbow drawings and feel hope instead of remembering flashing lights on rain-soaked highways. Nice artwork. Daniel turned to find his manager, Rachel Kim, leaning against the entrance to his cubicle. She was in her mid-30s, sharp and efficient, the kind of person who could reduce complex problems to elegant solutions. She'd approved his transfer to analytics without asking too many questions about why a former paramedic wanted to spend his days staring at spreadsheets. "My daughter," Daniel said. "She's 7. Very insistent about workplace decoration. Smart kid. This place could use more color." Rachel glanced at her tablet, then back at him. "You missed the morning stand-up. Everything okay?" Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't exactly explain that he'd spent the morning in the CEO's office confessing to being the paramedic who'd tried to save her sister's life 3 years ago, then confronting a drunk driver and his lawyer who wanted to blame him for manslaughter. That fell somewhere outside normal, acceptable excuses for missing meetings. "Personal matter," he said. "It ran long. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "Victoria's office called down about an hour ago," Rachel said casually, but Daniel could hear the curiosity beneath her professional tone. "Asked me to clear your schedule for the rest of the day. Said you were handling a sensitive situation at her request." Daniel blinked. "She did?" "She did. So either you're getting promoted, fired, or involved in something way above my pay grade." Rachel smiled slightly. "Given that she specifically said to make sure your afternoon was clear and that you should take whatever time you need, I'm guessing it's not the firing option." "I'm not getting promoted," Daniel said automatically. "Then it's the mysterious third option." Rachel straightened. "Whatever it is, the CEO thinks it's important enough to personally intervene in your schedule. That's not something that happens to people at your level. No offense. None taken. So if you need to talk about it, or if there's anything I should know that might impact your work..." "It's personal," Daniel repeated, then softened his tone. "But it's handled. Or at least it's as handled as it's going to get today. I appreciate you clearing my schedule." Rachel studied him for a moment, the way a good manager studies an employee who's not telling the whole truth but deserves privacy anyway. "Okay, take the afternoon. Tomorrow we'll need you back on the Morrison account, but today..." She gestured vaguely. "Today, deal with whatever this is." "And Daniel?" "Yes?" "If it stops being handled, if it becomes something that affects your ability to do your job, you come talk to me. That's what I'm here for. Not just spreadsheets and project management, people too." She left before he could respond, her footsteps quiet on the industrial carpet. Daniel sat in his cubicle, surrounded by Maya's drawings and the hum of office life continuing around him, and realized that Victoria had just protected him, had called his manager, cleared his schedule, given him cover without being asked, had treated him like someone who mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Victoria. Got your number from HER. Hope that's not too invasive. Can we talk? Not about work. About everything else. My office in an hour if you're willing." Daniel stared at the message. He could ignore it. Could claim he'd already left for the day, use the cleared schedule to go home early, pick up Maya from the babysitter, make dinner, read bedtime stories, pretend this morning had been a strange dream. He typed back, "I'll be there." The hour passed in a blur of forced productivity. Daniel opened reports, skimmed data, accomplished nothing of substance. His mind kept circling back to the conference room, to Marcus Webb's tears, to the lawyer's cold calculations, to Victoria standing at the head of the table like an avenging angel defending someone she'd spent 6 months trying to understand. When the clock finally hit the hour mark, Daniel saved his work, grabbed his phone, and headed for the elevator. The ride up to the 42nd floor felt different this time. This morning, he'd been running from ghosts. Now he was walking toward them deliberately, eyes open, defenses down. Victoria's office door was open. She stood by the windows again, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She'd changed clothes since the morning, traded the charcoal suit for dark jeans and a soft gray sweater. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, less CEO, more human. "Come in," she said without turning around. "Close the door." Daniel did. The click of the latch felt familiar now, like a sound he'd heard before in another life. "I've been thinking about what happened this morning," Victoria said. She still hadn't turned around. All of it, the parking garage, my office, the conference room, Marcus Webb, all of it. "Me too," Daniel admitted. "I can't stop wondering what would have happened if you'd delivered Emma's messages 3 years ago." Now she turned to face him. "If you'd walked into this building that day and found me and told me everything, how different would things have been?" "I don't know. I think about it constantly. These alternate timelines where we made different choices, where I didn't fight with Emma about her boyfriend, where she didn't drive on that highway that night, where you didn't have your emergency kit in your truck, where everything turned out differently." "But it didn't," Daniel said quietly. "No, it didn't." Victoria moved away from the windows, settled onto the couch where they'd sat that morning. "Emma died. You carried her last words for 3 years. I built an empire to avoid feeling the absence. Marcus Webb went to prison, and we've both been punishing ourselves for things we couldn't control." Daniel joined her on the couch, maintaining a careful distance. "You said something this morning about seeing me and being forced to feel alive, about how feeling alive felt like betrayal when someone you loved was gone." "I meant it." Victoria's voice was soft. "For 3 years I've been going through the motions, running a company, making decisions, attending meetings. But I haven't been living, I've been existing. There's a difference." "I know that difference. I think you do." She looked at him directly. "When did you stop living, Daniel? When your wife died? When Emma died? Somewhere in between?" The question cut deep, precise, surgical. "I don't know if I can pinpoint the exact moment. It was gradual, like watching a sunset. You don't notice each incremental loss of light. You just look up one day and realize it's dark." "That's exactly right." Victoria pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The gesture made her look smaller, more vulnerable. "People kept telling me time would heal, that the pain would fade, that I'd move on. But they were wrong. The pain didn't fade. I just got better at functioning while carrying it." "Does it ever get easier?" Daniel asked. "Easier? No. Different? Yes." She rested her chin on her knees. "I can talk about Emma now without crying, most days. I can look at her pictures. I can eat her cookies. I can remember the good things without being destroyed by the fact that there won't be any new good things. But I don't think it ever gets easier. You just learn to carry the weight better." "That's what you told Marcus Webb." "Because it's true." Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "I meant what I said to him. I'll never forgive him. But I also recognize that he's carrying something too. Guilt. Remorse. The knowledge that he destroyed lives with a single choice. That's a different kind of weight than grief, but it's still weight." Do you think he'll actually tell the parole board he doesn't want early release? I don't know. I hope so. But people's courage tends to fade when faced with concrete consequences. It's easy to make noble promises in a conference room. It's harder to follow through when it means staying in prison. She sighed. But that's his burden to carry, not ours. What is our burden? Daniel asked. The question hung between them. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. I think our burden is figuring out how to live again, she said finally. How to stop running from the things that hurt. How to stop punishing ourselves for surviving when Emma didn't. How to look at each other without seeing only death and failure. Is that even possible? I don't know. Her honesty was brutal and refreshing. But I think it might be necessary, because this morning, when I looked at you in the parking garage, I saw Emma. I saw the crash. I saw everything I'd been avoiding for 3 years. But I also saw the man who held her hand, the man who gave her comfort, the man who carried her last words, even though delivering them broke him. Victoria, let me finish. She held up a hand. I saw the single father who rearranges his entire life around his daughter, who hangs up crayon drawings, who left a career he loved because he needed to be present for his child, who punishes himself every day for things that weren't his fault. And I realized that we're doing the same thing. We're both trying to earn our right to be alive through suffering, through sacrifice, through making ourselves smaller and quieter and less present. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. I don't know how to stop. Neither do I. Victoria's voice was gentle. But I think maybe we could figure it out together. Not because we're healed or whole or ready, but because continuing like this isn't sustainable. Because our children deserve better. Because Emma deserves better than having her death turn us into ghosts. Maya asked me last night if I was sad, Daniel said suddenly. The words spilled out before he could stop them. She's 7 years old and she asked me if I was sad. Not about anything specific, just in general, sad. What did you tell her? I told her I was fine, that grown-ups sometimes get tired, but that doesn't mean they're sad. I lied to my daughter. His voice cracked. I lied to her because telling the truth would mean admitting that yes, I'm sad. I've been sad for 5 years since her mother died. I've been sad for 3 years since Emma died. I've been sad for so long I don't remember what it feels like to not be sad. Victoria reached across the space between them and took his hand. The touch was warm, grounding, real. She knows. What? She knows you're sad. Children always know. They're better at reading emotions than we give them credit for. Victoria's grip tightened. The question isn't whether she knows. The question is whether she sees you trying to hide it or whether she sees you trying to heal from it. There's a difference. I don't know how to heal from this. Start with honesty. Victoria's voice was firm now, certain. Stop telling yourself you failed Emma. Stop telling yourself you weren't enough. Stop punishing yourself for being human and fallible and limited by circumstances beyond your control. I can't just... Yes, you can. She shifted closer, still holding his hand. You can choose differently, right now. You can choose to stop running, stop hiding, stop making yourself invisible because you think that's what you deserve. What if I don't know how to be visible anymore? Then you learn. Victoria's eyes were intense, focused. You start small. You hang your daughter's drawings on your wall. You have coffee with coworkers. You stop taking the long route to avoid me. You let yourself be seen. What about you? Daniel asked. You're asking me to change, but what about you? Are you going to stop working 18-hour days? Stop avoiding your sister's memory by building an empire? The challenge hung in the air. Victoria's expression flickered, surprise, then something like respect. Fair question, she said. And you're right. I can't ask you to change if I'm not willing to do the same. She took a breath. I had lunch today. Actually sat down and ate a full meal instead of working through it. Patricia almost had a heart attack when I told her to clear my calendar. That's a start. It's terrifying is what it is. Victoria's laugh was shaky. I have no idea what to do with unstructured time. I've spent 3 years making sure every minute was accounted for, every moment filled with productivity, because empty time meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant falling apart, Daniel finished. Yes. She looked down at their joined hands. But I'm realizing that maybe falling apart isn't the worst thing. Maybe staying rigidly held together is actually more damaging. Maybe the only way through grief is to let it break you open so you can actually heal instead of just scabbing over. That sounds painful. Everything worth doing sounds painful at first. Victoria met his eyes. But I think continuing like this, continuing to hide from ourselves and each other, that's more painful. That's a slow death instead of a hard healing. Daniel knew she was right. Knew it in the part of himself that had spent 6 months constructing elaborate avoidance strategies. Knew it in the exhaustion that lived in his bones. Knew it in the way Maya looked at him sometimes, worried, and too perceptive for a 7-year-old. I don't want my daughter to grow up watching me hide from life, he said. Then don't. Victoria squeezed his hand once more, then released it. Show her what it looks like to face hard things, to acknowledge pain without being consumed by it, to choose healing even when it's scary. How? I don't know all the steps. Victoria's honesty was almost brutal, but I know the first one. We stop avoiding each other. We stop pretending we're fine. We acknowledge that we're both carrying Emma and that seeing each other hurts, but maybe it can also help. Help how? Because you're the only other person who was there at the end. You're the only person who knows what her last moments were actually like. Not the sanitized version, not the police report version, the real version. Victoria's voice trembled. And I'm the only person who knows what she was like before. Who knows that she couldn't whistle. That she always put too much salt in everything she cooked. That she cried at dog food commercials and pretended she had allergies. She told me about the cookies, Daniel said. About the secret ingredient. About how she'd been keeping it from you as a joke. Did she tell you about the burned batch from Christmas 2 years ago? Victoria asked, and now there was a hint of a smile. She tried to make them while drunk on champagne, set off the smoke detector, had to throw out the whole sheet because they were black as charcoal. She didn't mention that part. She wouldn't. She had selective memory about her cooking disasters. Victoria's smile widened slightly. But she'd want you to know, she'd want both of us to remember the real her, not just the dying version, not just the sister I lost, the actual Emma, flawed and funny and stubborn and alive. And there it was, the thing neither of them had been able to say. Emma wasn't just a tragedy, wasn't just a dead sister, or a lost patient, or a set of last words carried like stones. She was a person who'd lived and laughed and burned cookies and made terrible jokes and loved her sister fiercely. Tell me about her, Daniel said. Tell me things that weren't in her final messages. Tell me who she was before that highway. Victoria's expression cracked open, grief and gratitude mixing. She was brilliant and infuriating in equal measure. She could talk her way into or out of anything. She once convinced a police officer to let her off with a warning by reciting all the reasons why traffic laws were socially constructed and therefore negotiable. The officer was so baffled he just let her go. Daniel laughed, surprised by the sound coming from his own throat. She was terrible at directions. Victoria continued, the memories flowing now. Absolutely atrocious. She'd get lost in parking garages. She once drove 2 hours in the wrong direction because she refused to use GPS and insisted her sense of direction was fine. It was not fine. Did she ever make it to Barcelona? Daniel asked gently. Victoria's smile faded. No. She died 3 weeks before her trip. I found the plane tickets when I was cleaning out her apartment. Non-refundable, like she told you. I kept them. They're in my desk drawer. I don't know why. I couldn't throw them away. That's not pathological. That's human. I also kept her blue notebook, the one with the cookie recipe. Victoria's voice was quiet now. I can't bring myself to make them. Every Sunday I think about it. I pull out the notebook, I read the recipe, and then I close it and order takeout instead. Why? Because making her cookies feels like trying to replace her. Like pretending I can recreate something she made special. And I can't. Even with the recipe, even with the espresso powder secret, they won't be Emma's cookies. They'll just be cookies I made while crying in my kitchen. Daniel understood that fear. The fear that moving forward meant leaving someone behind, that healing meant forgetting, that living meant betraying the dead. What if we made them together? He heard himself say. Victoria looked at him sharply. What? The cookies. What if we made them together? Not to replace her, not to pretend we're fine, but to remember her in a different way. To honor the person she was instead of just the person we lost. I don't know if I can. You don't have to decide now. Daniel stood, feeling suddenly restless. But think about it. We could do it on a Sunday, your sister's sacred day. We could make the cookies, and we could talk about her, and we could let it hurt, and we could let it heal, and we could... He stopped, unsure how to finish. We could choose to live, Victoria finished quietly. Instead of just surviving. Yes. She stood too, moved to the windows one more time. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city stretched out below them, millions of people living their lives, carrying their own griefs and joys and mundane struggles. I'm scared, Victoria admitted. I'm scared that if I stop holding myself together so tightly, I'll shatter completely. I'm scared that if I let myself feel everything I've been avoiding, I won't be able to function. I won't be able to run this company. I won't be able to... Her voice broke. I won't be able to be the person Emma needed me to be. Emma's gone, Daniel said gently. You don't have to be what she needed anymore. You have to be what you need, what you deserve. I don't know what I deserve. Neither do I. Daniel joined her at the window. But I know what we don't deserve. We don't deserve to spend the rest of our lives punishing ourselves. We don't deserve to be ghosts in our own lives. We don't deserve to let one terrible night define every moment that comes after. They stood side by side, watching the sun sink lower, not touching, but close enough that Daniel could feel the warmth radiating from her. Close enough that the space between them felt less like distance and more like potential. Sunday, Victoria said finally. Next Sunday. We make the cookies. You're sure? No. She turned to him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But I think Emma would tell me to do it anyway. She'd tell me to stop being so dramatic and just make the damn cookies already. She'd tell me that life is short and grief is long, and sometimes you have to choose joy even when it feels impossible. Okay, Daniel said. Sunday. We make the cookies, we talk about Emma, we let ourselves remember and hurt, and maybe start healing. Victoria nodded. And during the week, at work? I'll take the south elevator, Daniel said. I'll stop hiding in the north stairwell. I'll stop rearranging my schedule to avoid you. I'll be visible. And I'll have lunch, Victoria countered. Actual lunch. Sitting down. Maybe even in the cafeteria where people can see me being human. Small steps. Small steps. She held out her hand. Deal? Daniel took it. Her grip was firm, warm, alive. Deal. They shook on it. This pact between two people bound by tragedy and trying desperately to find their way back to something resembling life. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't healing, but it was honest. It was real. It was a choice to stop running and start facing the things that hurt. Victoria walked him to the door. Before he left, she touched his arm gently. Thank you. For this morning. For telling me about Emma. For standing up to that lawyer. For being brave enough to stop hiding. I'm not brave, Daniel said. Yes, you are. Her smile was small but genuine. You just don't know it yet. Daniel left her office and walked to the elevator. As he rode down to the parking garage, he pulled out his phone and looked at the photo Maya's babysitter had sent. His daughter at the kitchen table creating art with fierce concentration. The best family, her drawing proclaimed. Just the two of them and a rainbow. He texted the babysitter. Leaving now. I'll be home in 30 minutes. Tell Maya I hung up her rainbow. The response came quickly. She'll be thrilled. She's been asking about it all day. Daniel smiled. Then he opened a new message to Victoria. Thank you too, for everything, for defending me, for being honest, for choosing this instead of running. See you Sunday. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage, the same concrete cathedral where this morning had started, but the space felt different now. Less like a place of confession and more like a place of beginning. Daniel walked to his car, got in, and drove toward home. Toward his daughter and her drawings and the life he'd been too afraid to fully live. The weight hadn't disappeared, The grief hadn't vanished, but something had shifted, some fundamental change in how he carried both. He was done running, done hiding, done pretending he didn't deserve to be seen. It was time to be visible, time to be honest, time to let the healing hurt. And maybe, just maybe, time to make some cookies on a Sunday afternoon while remembering a woman who died in his arms and changed two lives forever in ways neither of them had fully understood until now. The week that followed felt both endless and impossibly short. Daniel kept his promise about visibility, though each time he chose the south elevator instead of the north stairwell, his heart hammered against his ribs. Tuesday morning, he passed Victoria in the hallway outside a conference room. She'd looked up from her phone, met his eyes, and said, "Good morning, Daniel," in a voice that was professional, but warm. He'd managed to respond without his voice cracking, without turning around, without running. Progress, he supposed. Painful, awkward progress. Maya noticed the change in him, though she couldn't articulate exactly what was different. Wednesday night, while he was helping her with her homework, she'd looked up from her spelling words and asked, "Daddy, did something good happen at work?" "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because you seem different, like you're here more." She'd scrunched up her nose, thinking. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. For years, he'd been physically present, but emotionally absent, going through the motions of fatherhood while his mind lived in that rain-soaked highway. But something had shifted. The parking garage confession, the confrontation with Marcus Webb, the promise to Victoria, the choice to stop punishing himself for surviving. "I think something good did happen," he'd told Maya. "I think I'm learning how to be here better." She'd smiled at that, gap-toothed and radiant, and gone back to her spelling words without pressing for details. Children had an instinct for when to push and when to let things be. Maya had learned early how to navigate her father's silences. Thursday afternoon, Daniel found himself in the cafeteria at actual lunchtime instead of eating a protein bar at his desk. The space was crowded, noisy, full of the casual chaos of people taking a break from work. He'd bought a sandwich and was looking for an empty table when he heard his name. "Reeves! Over here!" Chen from accounting was waving at him, gesturing to an empty seat at a table occupied by three other analysts Daniel recognized but had never really talked to. The old Daniel would have made an excuse, would have found a quiet corner, would have eaten quickly and escaped back to his cubicle. The new Daniel, or maybe just the tired of running Daniel, walked over and sat down. "Man, we never see you at lunch," Chen said around a mouthful of pasta. "I was starting to think you were a vampire. Only appear before sunrise and after sunset." "Just busy," Daniel said, unwrapping his sandwich. "Aren't we all?" This from Martinez, a woman in her late 20s who handled data visualization. "But Chen's right. You're like the ghost of the analytics department. We hear rumors you exist but rarely see proof. I prefer to think of myself as dedicated rather than ghostly." "Potato, potato," Chen grinned. "So what changed? Finally decide to join the land of the living?" The phrase hit harder than Chen could have known. Daniel took a bite of his sandwich to buy time, tasted nothing, swallowed. Something like that. They didn't press, just folded him into their conversation about the Morrison account and weekend plans and whether the coffee on the third floor was actually worse than the coffee on the fifth, or if it just seemed that way because of proximity to the restrooms. Normal conversation, mundane conversation, the kind of casual human connection Daniel had been avoiding for years. It felt strange, uncomfortable, but also good. Like a muscle he'd forgotten he had, slowly remembering its purpose. Friday brought an email from Victoria's assistant. Simple, professional. "Ms. Hale requests your presence Sunday at 2 p.m. Address attached. Casual dress. Confirm receipt." Daniel had stared at the message for a full minute before responding. The address was a high-rise in the city's nicest neighborhood, the kind of place where doormen wore uniforms and the lobby probably had actual art instead of corporate prints. Victoria's penthouse, he assumed, where she went home after 18-hour days, where she'd spent 3 years avoiding Sunday dinners because her sister wasn't there to share them. He'd confirmed receipt, then spent the rest of Friday trying not to think about it. Saturday, he took Maya to the park. They fed ducks, climbed on playground equipment, ate ice cream that dripped down their hands in the warm afternoon sun. She told him about school, about her friend Emma, who had the same name as someone Daniel used to know, about the science project she wanted to do on butterflies. "Did you know butterflies taste with their feet?" Maya asked, completely serious. "I did not know that." "It's true. Miss Rodriguez told us. They land on flowers and taste if the nectar is good with their feet. Isn't that weird?" "Very weird, but also kind of amazing." Maya had nodded sagely, licking her ice cream. "I think a lot of nature is weird and amazing at the same time." Daniel had looked at his daughter, this small person he'd created with his wife, this miracle who'd survived her mother's death and her father's grief, and still believed in butterflies and rainbows and the essential goodness of the world, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain exactly, something else. Something that might have been hope if he'd been brave enough to name it. "You're right, kiddo," he'd said. "Weird and amazing. That's exactly what it is." Now it was Sunday, and Daniel stood outside Victoria's building at 1:55 p.m., holding a bag with the ingredients he'd promised to bring. Vanilla extract, chocolate chips, butter. The basic components of cookies that would never taste quite like Emma's, but that they'd make anyway, because staying paralyzed by perfectionism was just another form of running. The doorman checked his name against a list and waved him through to elevators that were faster and quieter than anything in the office building. The penthouse button required a key, which the doorman had provided. Daniel rode up alone, watching the floor numbers climb, trying to calm his racing heart. The elevator opened directly into Victoria's foyer. She was waiting for him, dressed in jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked young and nervous, and nothing like the Ice Queen CEO from the Forbes profile. "You came," she said, and there was relief in her voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might reconsider. Decide this was too much too fast. Decide that making cookies with your dead patient's sister was crossing some line you weren't ready to cross." She took the bag from him. "I'm glad you didn't." "I almost did," Daniel admitted. "About 6 times between Thursday and this morning. But Maya asked me what I was doing today, and I told her I was making cookies with a friend. And she said, 'That sounds nice, Daddy.' And I realized I didn't want to be the kind of person who breaks promises anymore, even small ones about cookies." Victoria's smile was soft, genuine. "Come in. Fair warning, the kitchen is probably nicer than anything you've ever seen, and I have no idea how to use half of it. Emma was the cook. I'm the person who orders takeout and pretends it counts as a meal." The penthouse was beautiful in the way expensive things often were. Clean lines, minimalist furniture, huge windows offering views of the city. But it also felt empty, unlived in, like a hotel room someone had been occupying temporarily for 3 years without ever quite settling in. Victoria led him to the kitchen, which was indeed nicer than anything Daniel had ever cooked in. Marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, a spice rack that looked like it had never been used. "Emma's notebook is here," Victoria said, pulling a blue spiral-bound book from a drawer. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it on the counter. "I've looked at this recipe probably 100 times, but I've never actually—" She stopped. "I'm scared." "Me too," Daniel said. "I haven't baked anything since my wife died. She used to make birthday cakes from scratch. After she passed, I bought store-bought cakes for Maya's birthdays because the thought of trying to recreate something Sarah made felt impossible." "How did Maya handle that?" "She was 2 when Sarah died. She doesn't remember her mother's cakes. She thinks store-bought is normal. She thinks that's just what birthdays are." Daniel's throat tightened. "I've protected her from loss by never letting her know what she lost. I don't know if that's kindness or cowardice. Maybe it's both." Victoria opened the notebook, and Daniel saw Emma's handwriting for the first time. Looping, energetic, the kind of script that suggested someone who thought faster than they could write. The recipe was annotated with notes in the margins. "Too much vanilla makes them taste like candles. Don't forget to cream butter properly or they come out weird. Secret ingredient, espresso powder. Don't tell Vic." Victoria's finger traced over that last note. "She kept this secret for 5 years. 5 years of me begging for the recipe and her laughing and saying a chef never reveals her secrets. And all along it was just—" Her voice broke. "It was just coffee. Something so simple. And she made it this whole mystery because it made her happy to have something that was just hers. She wanted you to know at the end, Daniel said gently. She told me specifically, made me write it down. She wanted you to have this. I know. Victoria wiped at her eyes roughly. Which is why we're going to make them. We're going to follow her instructions and use her secret ingredient and probably mess them up because neither of us knows what we're doing, but we're going to try. They worked in silence for a while, measuring ingredients with the kind of careful attention people use when they're afraid of making mistakes. Daniel creamed the butter and sugar while Victoria measured out the flour. They worked around each other in the kitchen, two people who barely knew each other but who were bound together by loss and the determination to transform it into something else. Tell me about your wife, Victoria said suddenly. You've heard so much about Emma. I want to hear about Sarah. The request caught Daniel off guard. He paused in his mixing, considered deflecting, then remembered his promise about honesty. Sarah was... He stopped, started again. Sarah was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel seen. Not special or important or elevated, just seen. Like whoever you were, whatever you brought to the table, that was enough for her. How did you meet? College. She was pre-med. I was undeclared and kind of lost. We were in the same chemistry class, and He smiled at the memory. She caught me falling asleep during a lecture and threw a paper ball at my head. When I looked up, she mouthed, "Pay attention," and went back to her notes like nothing had happened. Victoria added chocolate chips to the bowl Daniel was mixing. So she kept you on your toes. From day one, she decided I needed direction, needed purpose. She's the one who suggested I become a paramedic, said I had good instincts and steady hands, and the kind of calm that people needed in emergencies. His voice roughened. She saw things in me I didn't see in myself. But she went to medical school? She did. Was going to be a surgeon, had her whole career mapped out. Then Maya happened. Planned, wanted, but earlier than we'd expected. Sarah decided to defer her residency for a few years. She said being Maya's mom was more important than being a doctor right away. Daniel's hand stilled on the mixing bowl. Then the cancer happened. Stage 4 ovarian. By the time they caught it, there was nothing they could do except manage pain. How long did she have? 4 months from diagnosis to death. 4 months of watching this brilliant, vibrant woman fade. 4 months of Maya asking why mommy was always sleeping. 4 months of me trying to be a paramedic and a husband and a father while the center of our family was dying. Victoria pulled out a baking sheet, started preparing it with parchment paper. Her movements were mechanical, but Daniel could see she was listening intently. The worst part, he continued, was that I knew exactly what was happening. Medical knowledge is supposed to be empowering, but watching someone you love die when you understand every clinical detail of their deterioration, that's not empowerment, that's torture. Is that why you quit being a paramedic? Because you couldn't save her? Partly, but also because after she died, I couldn't save anyone. Every patient was Sarah. Every emergency was her emergency. Every loss was losing her all over again. He scooped cookie dough onto the baking sheet with more force than necessary. Then Emma happened, and I failed again. And I realized I wasn't a paramedic anymore. I was just someone dressed as a paramedic, going through motions, making mistakes, putting people at risk. You didn't fail Emma. I know. Intellectually, I know. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Daniel finished placing the last dollop of dough. I've known for 3 years that I did everything I could, but I felt for 3 years that I should have done more, should have been better, should have somehow found a way to cheat death. Victoria slid the baking sheet into the oven, set the timer. I felt the same way. Still feel it sometimes. Like if I just insisted Emma come to Sunday dinner that week, she wouldn't have been on that highway. She'd have been at my place eating pot roast and complaining about her boyfriend. She'd be alive. But you can't know that. Exactly, I can't know. Just like you can't know if different choices would have saved her. We're both torturing ourselves with hypotheticals that have no answers. She leaned against the counter and suddenly looked exhausted. I'm so tired, Daniel. I'm so tired of carrying this, of waking up every day and immediately feeling the absence, of building a life around a hole instead of around actual substance. Then why do we keep doing it? Because it feels like betrayal to let go. Because being happy feels like we're saying their deaths don't matter. Because moving forward feels like leaving them behind. Victoria's voice cracked. Because grief is the last connection we have to them. And if we let it go, what's left? The timer wouldn't go off for another 10 minutes, but the smell of baking cookies was already filling the kitchen. Sweet and familiar and achingly normal. The smell of Sunday afternoons and family traditions and the kind of simple pleasures that kept existing even when the world fell apart. Daniel moved to stand beside Victoria at the counter, not touching, but close. What if we're wrong? What if grief isn't the last connection? What if memory is? What if the way to honor them isn't to suffer, but to live the kind of lives they'd want for us? Sarah would want you to be happy? Sarah would want me to be present for Maya. She'd want me to hang up rainbow drawings and feed ducks in the park and make birthday cakes from scratch instead of buying them from the grocery store. He swallowed hard. She'd want me to fall in love again someday, to give Maya a complete family, to not spend the rest of my life as a memorial to her death. Could you do that? Fall in love again? The question was gentle, curious, without agenda. Daniel considered it honestly. I don't know. Maybe. If I met someone who... He stopped. If I met someone who understood, someone who knew about loss and grief and the weight of carrying people who aren't here anymore, someone who wouldn't expect me to be whole or healed or easy. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. What about Emma? Would she want me to be happy? From what you've told me? From what she said in her last moments? Daniel turned to look at Victoria directly. Emma would want you to make her cookies. She'd want you to have Sunday dinners, even without her. She'd want you to stop working 18-hour days and actually live your life instead of just managing it. She'd tell me I'm being dramatic. Probably. She seemed like the type. Victoria laughed, watery but genuine. She was. She had no patience for my tendency toward martyrdom. She used to tell me I had a PhD in making things harder than they needed to be. Sounds like she knew you well. She did. She was... Victoria stopped, emotion overtaking her. She was the only family I had left. After our mom died, it was just us. Emma and Vic against the world. Sunday dinners and inside jokes and someone who knew all my worst qualities and loved me anyway. And when she died, I lost. I lost my person. The one who made me laugh when I took myself too seriously. The one who called me out when I was being insufferable. The one who... She broke off, crying now. Real crying, not the controlled tears from earlier in the week. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel didn't think, just pulled her into his arms, held her while she fell apart against his chest. I miss her so much, Victoria gasped between sobs. I miss her every day and it doesn't get better. It just gets different. And I'm so tired of being the one left behind. I'm so tired of carrying this alone. You're not alone, Daniel said quietly, his own eyes burning. You're not alone anymore. They stood in the kitchen while the cookies baked, while the timer ticked down, while the afternoon light shifted through the windows. Two people holding each other in shared grief, in shared survival, in shared determination to stop punishing themselves for the crime of still being alive. When Victoria finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, her professional composure completely destroyed. I'm sorry. That wasn't... I didn't mean to... Don't apologize. Not for this. Not for being human. The timer went off. Victoria wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a shaky breath, and moved to the oven. The cookies were golden brown, perfectly baked, smelling exactly like Emma's recipe promised they would. They look good, Daniel said. They look terrifying. But Victoria pulled them out anyway, set them on a cooling rack. We made them. We actually made them. Emma would be proud. Emma would point out all the ways we probably messed them up, but yeah, she'd also be proud. Victoria stared at the cookies like they were artifacts from another world. What do we do now? Now we wait for them to cool, and we eat them, and we remember her. Not just the death, not just the loss, but the actual her. The person who lived and laughed and made terrible jokes and kept cookies secrets. They moved to the living room while the cookies cooled, sat on the couch that overlooked the city, this space that had felt so empty earlier but now felt occupied by something besides just furniture and grief. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "About that night. About Emma's last moments." "Of course." Was she scared? Daniel had been expecting this question, had thought about it for 3 years, had rehearsed a dozen different answers, but now, faced with Victoria's honest need to know, he gave her the truth. At first, yes. She was scared, in pain, confused about what had happened. But as time went on, as I explained what I was doing and why, as she understood that I wasn't leaving, the fear changed to something else. Not peace exactly, but acceptance, determination to use whatever time she had left to say what needed to be said. She fought. She fought. Not to stay alive, I think she knew that wasn't possible, but to stay conscious, to stay present, to make sure her last words counted. Daniel's voice was steady now, certain. "Your sister died the way she lived, on her own terms, with purpose, making sure the people she loved knew they were loved." Victoria closed her eyes, processing this. "Thank you for telling me, for giving me that. It's the truth. It's what she deserves." They sat in silence for a while. Through the windows, the city continued its Sunday afternoon rhythm. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes, life happening with complete indifference to personal tragedy. The world kept turning whether you were ready or not. "The cookies should be cool enough now," Victoria said finally. They returned to the kitchen. The cookies sat on the cooling rack, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Victoria picked one up, held it like it might disintegrate. Then she took a bite. Her eyes closed. A sound escaped her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "Tastes like hers," she whispered. "It actually tastes like Emma's cookies." Daniel took one, bit into it. The flavor was rich, complex, the espresso powder adding depth to the sweetness. He'd never tasted Emma's original cookies, had no basis for comparison. But he believed Victoria, believed that somehow, following her sister's recipe, they'd managed to recreate something precious. "She'd be happy we made them," Victoria said. "She'd probably make fun of how long it took me, but she'd be happy. She'd want you to make them again, to have Sunday dinners again, to fill this place with more than just work and absence." "I know." Victoria set down her half-eaten cookie. "I'm going to try. I can't promise I'll be good at it. Can't promise I won't fall back into old patterns. But I'm going to try to actually live here instead of just exist here. That's all any of us can do. Try. Fail sometimes. Try again." They finished the cookies, drinking coffee Victoria made in her expensive machine that she barely knew how to use. They talked about Emma, about Sarah, about the ways loss had shaped them, and the ways they wanted to stop letting it define them. They talked about Maya and her rainbow drawings, about the company Victoria had built, about small steps and big fears, and the courage it took to choose healing over hiding. As the afternoon faded into evening, Daniel checked his phone and realized hours had passed without him noticing. "I should go. Maya will be wondering where I am. Thank you for coming, for doing this with me." Victoria walked him to the door. "For keeping your promise about the cookies, even when it would have been easier to run. Thank you for asking me, for giving me a reason to stop running." They stood in the foyer, and the moment felt weighted with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Not romance, this wasn't a love story, not yet, maybe not ever, but connection, understanding, the recognition that they'd both been drowning and had somehow found each other's hands in the dark. "Same time next Sunday?" Victoria asked. "We still have half a batch of dough in the fridge." "Same time next Sunday," Daniel agreed. "Maybe we can try them without crying this time. Let's not get overambitious on—" He laughed, and the sound felt good, natural, like something he was remembering how to do. The elevator ride down felt different than the ride up, lighter somehow. Daniel walked out into the early evening air, pulled out his phone and called Maya's babysitter. "Tell her I'm on my way home, and tell her—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell her Daddy made cookies today with a friend. And it was hard, but it was also good, and tomorrow I'm going to teach her how to make them too." The week after that, Daniel started taking the south elevator without his heart racing, started having lunch in the cafeteria more often than not, started participating in team meetings instead of just attending them silently. Small changes that added up to something that felt like living instead of surviving. Victoria started leaving work at 6 instead of 8, started having actual dinners instead of working through meals, started saying yes to social invitations she'd been declining for 3 years. They saw each other at work, exchanged normal pleasantries, maintained professional boundaries. But they also texted occasionally, shared pictures. Daniel sent photos of Maya's new drawings. Victoria sent photos of her attempts at Sunday dinners that weren't cookies. They were building something, slowly and carefully, that looked like friendship but felt like more. Like two people who'd survived the same storm and were learning how to trust solid ground again. Sunday dinners became a ritual. Sometimes they made cookies. Sometimes they tried other recipes from Emma's notebook. Sometimes they just ordered takeout and talked for hours about loss and healing and the strange, difficult work of choosing to be happy when happiness felt like betrayal. Maya met Victoria in week 3, a casual introduction in the park that Daniel had been terrified about, but that went smoothly. Victoria had admired Maya's latest drawing, asked thoughtful questions about her butterfly project, and won his daughter over completely by knowing the names of different butterfly species. "I like her," Maya had announced afterward. "She's nice, and she knows about monarchs." "She is nice," Daniel had agreed, his heart full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Months passed. Not healing. Healing was too clean a word for the messy, complicated work of learning to carry grief without being crushed by it. But progress. Growth. The slow, painful stretching of lives that had contracted around loss. Daniel started volunteering with the local EMT training program, teaching new paramedics about trauma response. Found that he could talk about emergency medicine without falling apart, could share knowledge without being destroyed by memories, could help the next generation do better than he'd done. Victoria started a scholarship fund in Emma's name for women pursuing marketing degrees, started attending industry conferences again, started letting herself be human in public instead of maintaining the Ice Queen facade that had protected her but also isolated her. They never explicitly discussed what they were to each other. Labels felt both premature and irrelevant. They were two people learning to live again, choosing to do it together because doing it alone had nearly destroyed them both. One Sunday, 8 months after that first conversation in the parking garage, Victoria looked up from the pot roast they were attempting and said, "I think Emma would like you." Daniel paused in his vegetable chopping. "Yeah? Yeah, she'd appreciate your dad jokes. She'd think your dedication to Maya was admirable. She'd probably try to set us up, actually. She was always trying to matchmake me with people she thought would be good for me." "And would I be? Good for you?" Victoria considered this seriously. "I think you already are. Not in a romantic sense necessarily, though." She stopped, started again. "I think you're good for me because you understand what it costs to survive. You don't expect me to be healed or whole or easy. You see me the way Sarah saw you." "I think you're good for me too," Daniel admitted. "You make me want to try harder, to be present, to give Maya a father who actually lives instead of just going through motions. You make me want to deserve the second chance I've been given. What if we're not ready for this? Whatever this is. Then we're not ready, and we figure it out anyway. Together, slowly, honestly." He set down his knife, moved to stand beside her at the stove. "I spent 3 years running from you because seeing you hurt. But the hurt was never about you, it was about me. About my own guilt and grief and inability to forgive myself for being human. And now? Now seeing you still hurts sometimes. But it also helps. It also heals. It also reminds me that life continues even when we think it can't. That joy is possible even when it feels impossible. That we're allowed to choose happiness even when happiness feels like betrayal." Victoria turned off the stove, faced him fully. "I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. Don't know if it's too soon or too complicated or too tangled up in shared trauma. But it's true. And I'm tired of not saying true things." Daniel's heart stuttered in his chest. "I'm falling in love with you too, and you're right. It's too soon and too complicated and definitely tangled up in trauma, but it's also real. And I think Sarah would want me to be honest about real things, and Emma would want you to take chances on things that scare you. So what do? We keep making Sunday dinners. We keep being honest. We keep choosing each other even when it's hard. We let Maya continue to think you're the nice lady who knows about butterflies. And maybe eventually we figure out how to build something new from all these broken pieces. That sounds terrifying. It does, but I'm tired of running from terrifying things. Daniel reached for her hand, held it gently. I'd rather face them. With you. One Sunday dinner at a time. Victoria squeezed his hand. Okay. One Sunday at a time. We face the terrifying things together. They finished making dinner, called Maya in from the living room where she'd been drawing, sat down together at Victoria's table that had been empty for too long. They ate pot roast that was slightly overcooked but still good. They talked about butterflies and work and the small, ordinary details of lives being lived instead of endured. And later, after Maya had fallen asleep on Victoria's couch and Daniel had carried her to his car, after he'd driven home through the city streets and tucked his daughter into bed, he stood in her doorway, watching her sleep. I love you, Maya Bug, he whispered, and I'm going to keep getting better at being here. Keep getting better at being the dad you deserve. Keep choosing to live instead of just survive. Maya stirred in her sleep, smiled without waking, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not peace. Peace was too simple for the complicated work of healing, but something close. Something that felt like hope and hurt and the beginning of joy all mixed together. He thought about Emma, dying in his arms 3 years ago, using her last moments to make sure her sister knew she was loved. Thought about Sarah, fighting cancer with grace and determination, making him promise to give Maya a good life even after she was gone. Thought about Victoria, choosing to make cookies despite her fear, choosing to feel things despite the pain, choosing him despite all the complicated reasons it would be easier not to. Two people carrying the same guilt, the same grief, the same terrible knowledge that life was fragile and loss was inevitable and happiness was never guaranteed, but also carrying the same determination to try anyway, to choose healing, to honor the dead by actually living instead of building monuments to absence. Daniel walked to his own room, looked at the photo of Sarah on his nightstand. I think I'm going to be okay, he told the image. It took a long time. Took meeting someone who understood. Took finally forgiving myself for not being able to save everyone. But I think I'm going to be okay. Maya's going to be okay. We're going to build a good life. The kind of life you wanted for us. The photo didn't answer, but he didn't need it to. He knew what Sarah would say. Knew she'd be proud of him for finally choosing to be visible, to be honest, to be present. Knew she'd approve of Victoria, of the way they were building something careful and complicated and real from the ruins of their separate tragedies. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. Thank you for today, for every Sunday, for choosing to stop running even when running felt safer, for teaching me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying them forward while also moving forward. Sleep well, Daniel. He texted back. Thank you too, for the cookies, for the honesty, for seeing me and not looking away, for making me want to deserve the happiness I'm finally letting myself feel. See you at work tomorrow. South Elevator. No more hiding. No more hiding, she confirmed, for either of us. Daniel set his phone down and climbed into bed. Tomorrow he'd wake up early, make Maya breakfast, drop her at school, take the South Elevator, have lunch in the cafeteria, do his work, come home, help with homework, read bedtime stories. The ordinary rhythm of a life being lived with intention instead of obligation. And next Sunday, they'd make dinner again. Would sit together and talk about the people they'd lost and the people they were becoming. Would choose, over and over, to face the terrifying things together instead of running from them alone. Seeing each other still hurt sometimes. Still brought up memories of rain and crashes and hospital rooms and last words whispered with blood-slicked hands. But it also brought hope. Connection. The reminder that life continued, that love was possible, that joy could exist alongside grief without diminishing either. They were broken, both of them, scarred by loss, changed by tragedy. But they were also healing, learning, growing, building something new from the pieces of who they'd been before the world had taught them about absence. And maybe that was enough. Maybe choosing to try, choosing to be honest, choosing each other despite all the complicated reasons not to. Maybe that was the whole point. Not redemption, not forgetting, not moving on, just moving forward, together. One painful, beautiful, terrifying step at a time. Daniel closed his eyes and for the first time in years felt something that might have been peace. Fragile and new and easily shattered, but there, real, worth protecting. He'd spent 3 years running from the question Victoria had asked in the parking garage. Why are you avoiding me? He'd spent 3 years punishing himself for surviving when others hadn't. 3 years being invisible, being absent, being a ghost in his own life. But tonight, he was here, present, alive. And tomorrow, he'd be here again. And the day after that, and the day after that. No more running, no more hiding, no more letting grief be the only connection to the people he'd loved and lost. Just life, messy and complicated and painful and beautiful and absolutely worth living. For Maya, for Sarah, for Emma, for Victoria, for himself. Finally, gratefully, courageously worth living.